In this presentation, I will introduce you to Rudolf Steiner and give a brief overview of his worldview and theories. I got interested in Rudolf Steiner after reading a series of lectures he gave in 1919 called The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness. In these lectures, he speaks on the complex spiritual forces behind World War I, the human inability to create perfect social orders, and the tendency of humans to foment war and conflict. For some reason, he posits, humans are unable to stop fighting. What has happened to humanity? Steiner embarked upon a lifetime of study and contemplation as he wrestled with this question. He came to the conclusion that humanity in general is asleep to the fact that fallen spirits, cast down to earth from the spiritual worlds, had become active on earth. They infected human thinking about the surrounding world, and spirituality and science became divided as people focused mainly on the material world. Steiner believed that only the defeat and fall of these spirits of darkness would enable humans to regain the spiritual awareness that had existed in earlier cultural epochs. These spirits have their role to play in human evolution too. To quote Steiner, the task of evil is to promote the ascent of the human being. Who was Rudolf Steiner? Rudolf Steiner was born in Austria on February 27, 1861. He was a seeker of spiritual truths. As a philosopher, scientist, and artist, he developed a philosophy based upon the idea that humans can contact spiritual worlds through the intellect. This movement is known as Anthroposophy. As a child, he began to think in terms of those things which are seen and those which are not seen. He was curious and sought to investigate the why of what he experienced, though he was not taught or encouraged to do so in school. This led him later in life to formulate his own plan for education, which eventually came to be known as Waldorf education. He was influenced by many different teachers. One philosopher he was introduced to early was Immanuel Kant. Steiner saw Kant's book Critique of Pure Reason in a bookstore and took some important lessons from it. He decided that he wanted to accomplish three things in his own reading and analysis as he studied. 1, every thought would be subject to survey. 2, establish a harmony between thinking and the teachings of religion. And 3, no vague feeling would incline a thought in any particular direction. For Steiner, the unconscious was something which could more and more be raised up into consciousness through the strivings of the soul's life. He wished to make clear that true reality is to be sought not by breaking through from without, but by sinking down into the inner life of man. In 1903, in a letter to a friend, he wrote, "I never speak of anything spiritual that I do not know by the most direct spiritual experience. This principle is my guiding star, and it has enabled me to overcome illusions." During his 30th year, Steiner began to study the works of Johann Wolfgang von Goethe. In 1888, Steiner was invited to work as an editor at the Goethe archives in Weimar. The city was a focal point of the German Enlightenment and home of the leading literary figures of Weimar classicism, Goethe, and Friedrich Schiller. Steiner finally decided to begin to study mysticism during this period. He said, "The mystic seemed to me to be a man who failed to come into right relation to the world of ideas, in which for me the spiritual has its existence." What attracted Steiner to the mystics was the character of the inner experiences that they described. He thought that man can understand what the general reality is in the outer world only when he has perceived this genuine reality within himself. In essence, like the ancient Greeks who built the oracle at Delphi, Steiner stressed the importance of know thyself. He wrote that man does not possess his own true being, his genuine self-consciousness as something given from the beginning. Instead, he must first achieve this through an understanding of his consciousness with itself. He became familiar with Nietzsche's writings, and though he was fascinated, he was also repelled at the same time. He thought of Nietzsche as a tragic figure, but he could also understand that philosopher's personal struggle, because he too had undertaken a journey which caused him great personal anguish. As a child, Steiner had so many questions that went unanswered because it was not considered proper to discuss certain issues, and in his later years there was much opposition to his worldview. Those around him lived during an age he felt was overly focused on the natural and scientific world, to the denigration of spiritual attitudes. He wrote, "I believe that I was enabled by these conceptions to see clearly into the nature of materialism. I perceive the harmful character of this way of thinking, not in the fact that the materialist directs his attention to the manifestation of a being in the form of matter, but in the way in which he conceives the material. He contemplates matter without becoming aware that in reality he is in the presence of spirit, which is simply manifesting itself in material form. He does not know that spirit metamorphoses itself into matter in order to attain to ways of working which are possible only in this metamorphosis. Spirit must first take on the form of a material brain in order to lead in this form the life of the conceptual world, which can bestow upon man in his earthly life a freely acting self-consciousness. To be sure, in the brain, spirit mounts upward out of matter, but only after the material brain has arisen out of spirit." Steiner began to form an idea for a conception of the inner man. This inner man came down out of the spiritual world into nature and united with it to perceive and act in the world of the senses. Taking the path of the soul into spirit means not just reaching a state of consciousness where one has thoughts, but can think about his own thinking. He was heavily influenced by Carl Julius Scherzer, who spoke about a real spiritual being which lives in a group of individual men who belong to a folk, or folk soul. He sought to find the relationship between the spiritual and the natural worlds. Steiner experienced mental struggles as he tried to integrate his thoughts about this with prevailing attitudes of his time. Steiner lectured extensively throughout Europe during his lifetime. He thought deeply about the divide that had come to pass between the study of science and spirituality. The human body, he wrote, is a spiritual vessel. As an esoteric philosopher and clairvoyant, he wrote that the human race was engaged in a spiritual war. Steiner described the human being as composed of body, soul, and spirit. He thought humans had become spiritually restricted by their attachment to this material world. To reconnect human consciousness, he thought, he needs to rise above attention to matter. Steiner describes the cultural epochs in his lectures on the apocalypse of St. John. During the great cultural epochs, humanity continued to form its non-physical members. Development follows the Platonic world year, which is approximately 25,800 of our years. Each epoch equals how long it takes for the sun to advance 1/12 of the zodiac. When 7 cultural epochs are completed, a major break takes place, or what Steiner calls a war of all against all. Then a completely new development cycle begins. The first of these took place from 7227 to 5067 BC. This was the ancient Indian age of civilization. The second spanned the years 5067 to 2907 and was the ancient Persian age of civilization. The third epoch was the Babylonian, Chaldean, Egyptian age of civilization, which was from 2907 to 747 BC. The fourth epoch was the Greco-Latin age of civilization from 747 BC to 1413 AD. The fifth epoch, our present epoch, is the Anglo-German culture, which began in 1413 AD and stretches to 3573 AD. The two ages beyond that, the sixth and seventh, remain unknown to us. Each cultural epoch lasts about 2,160 years and serves above all the development of the human soul. Our age will experience a downfall, or the war of all against all, which will usher in a new age. Steiner writes that there is a mysterious connection between human consciousness and the destructive powers of decline and fall in the universe. At present, we are in the fifth post-Atlantean age, the consciousness soul age. Towards the end of this age, some souls will have gained enough spiritual maturity to avoid another earthly incarnation. Steiner believed an epic battle was being fought in the spiritual world that would eventually lead to a dark fate for humanity. He gave a series of lectures in 1919 in Dornach, Switzerland, which have since become a book called The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness. In these lectures, Steiner warns humans that the unabated obsession with scientific materialism would have disastrous consequences. He explains that in the early 19th century, specifically 1879, certain spirits of darkness were cast down from heaven into the material plane. The two most significant of these were Lucifer and Ahriman. These spirits of darkness were forced out of the heavens following their defeat in a 40-year battle with the Archangel Michael. They influence human minds, though humanity in general is asleep to the fact that they are intensely active on Earth. Demonic forces work through people who are influenced by these dark spirits. Lucifer and Ahriman joined with other spirits already on the earth plane that have been influencing humanity since the time of the fall. Lucifer is the light bringer whose original purpose was to make humans more spiritual and to increase the free will of humans. On the other hand, Ahriman has a descending influence on humans, making them more focused on materialism and easier to control. 3,000 years prior to the Christian era, together with the promptings of wisdom, came a moral impulse. Steiner believed that just as there was the incarnation of Christ in the man of Jesus of Nazareth, there was an actual incarnation of Lucifer in far-off Asia, about 3000 BC. This inspired the Asian culture with wisdom, but it lacked a moral impulse. According to Steiner, it was Judaism that brought the moral impulse into the evolution of humanity through the incarnation of Christ. The Lucifer individuality incarnated in Asia with the original pagan wisdom intact. The Luciferic beings have from the very beginning been associated in some way with the evolution of humanity. Steiner stresses the necessity of not adopting what he calls a Philistine attitude about these Luciferic beings. By this he means not to think of them in a derogatory manner. He says the whole of the old pagan wisdom emanated from a Luciferic source. These beings were truly wise, and Steiner gives us this example. Think of the 7 holy rishis of ancient India. When an Indian interpreted the wisdom of the holy rishis, he knew, if he had been initiated into these things, that the teachers of the rishis were Luciferic beings. For what the Luciferic beings brought with them into Earth evolution was, above all, the world of thought, of intellectualist thought pervading culture, the world of reason. The sources of pagan wisdom are Luciferic beings. This is what Steiner has to say about this. We must realize that man would have remained a child had he not received from the mysteries the constant instruction that emanated from Luciferic beings. Those who possessed the knowledge and the inherited primeval wisdom were not fearful of receiving this wisdom from Luciferic sources. They took upon themselves the obligation incumbent upon everyone to whom Luciferic beings impart knowledge from spiritual realms. The obligation was to use this Luciferic cosmic wisdom rightly for the good of Earth evolution. In olden times, the wisdom needed for the progress of humanity could only be obtained from a Luciferic source. Hence, the initiates were obliged to receive it from that source and at the same time to take upon themselves the obligation not to yield to the aspirations of the Luciferic beings. Though this Lucifer incarnation spread its influence over the whole of the ancient world, but this Luciferic wisdom was one-sided, according to Steiner. He says that Lucifer seeks to induce humans to abandon the path of Earth evolution and take another path, one leading to a sphere aloof from the Earth. Lucifer wants to abandon the earth to its fate, to win mankind for a kingdom alien to the kingdom of Christ. The wise men of old who received the primeval wisdom from the hands of Lucifer had to pledge themselves not to yield to his wishes, but to use the wisdom for the good of earth evolution. That, in essence, was what was accomplished through the pre-Christian mysteries. From these Luciferic beings, man received the rudiments of what has developed in the course of evolution into the faculties of speech and thinking. Steiner proposes that if humans were to simply draw away from the Luciferic element without putting something different in its place, evil would result. Man would grow together with the earth to the particular territory on earth where he's born, and his cultural life would become specialized and differentiated. Steiner points out that this is already happening with the rise of materialism and nationalism. Just as there was an incarnation of Lucifer in the flesh and an incarnation of Christ in the flesh, there will be an actual incarnation of Ahriman in the flesh in the West. Humanity on earth cannot escape this, as it is inevitable according to Steiner. It is the endeavor of the Ahrimanic powers to reduce the earth to a state of complete rigidification. The first impulse towards the rigidification of the earth would emanate from the souls of men themselves, from their apathy, their intolerance, and love of ease. Steiner tells us that from the spiritual world, this Ahrimanic power is preparing for incarnation on earth and is trying in every way to make preparations to mislead and corrupt mankind to the highest level possible. The most important thing, however, is that humans prepare for it by being vigilant about certain trends in evolution. Humans must awaken their consciousness in every domain in order to recognize with greater clarity those trends in life which are leading towards the Ahrimanic incarnation. They must learn from spiritual science to find the key to life. Steiner places importance on the recognition that Ahriman will live among humans on earth. He points out the continually growing number of people who want nothing to do with any knowledge of spiritual matters or science of the spirit. What is essential is that from now onwards, is that knowledge of the driving forces of evolution must not be withheld from humans. It must be realized that in truth, human beings are balanced, as it were, between the Luciferic and the Ahrimanic powers, and that the Christ has become a companion of humans, leading them first away from the battle with Lucifer and then into the battle with Ahriman. Ahriman and Lucifer will always work hand in hand. The only question is which of the two predominates in man's consciousness at a particular epoch of time. It was preeminently Luciferic culture that persisted until after the mystery of Golgotha, a culture inspired by the incarnation of Lucifer in China in the 3rd millennium BC. So what is this mystery of Golgotha? Through death on Golgotha, the Christ united himself with the earth. A being Christ, which until then had only been cosmic, united itself with earth's evolution through his death. Since then, this being is bound to the earth and lives in the souls of humans on earth. The whole time before this mystery was only a time of preparation in the evolution of the earth. The mystery of Golgotha gave the earth its meaning when the earthly body of Jesus of Nazareth was given over to the elements of the earth. From that time, the Christ was connected with the spiritual sphere of the earth and lives in it. Steiner says that there had been no Luciferic wisdom, no understanding of the mystery of Golgotha. None of this could have been acquired through the Gnosis in the early centuries of Christendom without it. Understanding of the mystery of Golgotha diminished with the fading of the Luciferic wisdom, and understanding cannot be found through external Ahrimanic science. During the present phase of evolution, all experiences confronting humans in the physical world during the Earth's further existence will represent a decline. We are regressing, devolving, as opposed to evolving in terms of spiritual development. Humans are heading for the war of all against all. Steiner gives an example of the concept that man himself is one of the active factors in the Earth's evolution. During the Atlantean epoch, there was one main continent on Earth, Atlantis, and it extended over the area that is now the Atlantic Ocean. At a certain period in this Atlantean evolution, immorality of a particular kind was rampant throughout the then civilized world. Human beings had far greater power over the forces of nature than they later possessed, and employed these forces for evil purposes. Then came the great Atlantean catastrophe. Steiner writes that the orthodox geologist will naturally trace this catastrophe to processes in the mineral kingdom, but it will not occur to those who base their thinking on the principles of modern natural science to say to themselves that the deeds and activities of men were among the contributory causes. Unlawful magical practices based on the fact that certain human beings learn to employ their will wrongfully create destructive forces that affect the earth and all humans. But in truth, the Atlantean catastrophe was the outcome of the deeds of men on the earth. Within mankind lies the causes for what happens on earth. The moral conduct and achievement of human beings on earth are the real causes of what comes to pass in the course of the earth's existence. What must come about on the earth is spiritual development. In humans, the spiritual nature has been separated from the physical nature. The Ahrimanic incarnation will be greatly furthered if men fail to establish a free and independent spiritual life, a life which stays away from entanglement in economic or political life. The Ahrimanic power opposes a free spiritual life in humans and seeks to keep them in darkness. Steiner writes that there is nothing more Ahrimanic than knowledge of the outer material world, for it is sheer illusion. He says, the Ahrimanic incarnation cannot be averted. It is inevitable, for men must confront Ahriman face to face. He will be the individuality by whom it will be made clear to men what indescribable cleverness can be developed if they call to their help all that earthly forces can do to enhance cleverness and ingenuity. In the catastrophes that will befall humanity in the near future, men will become extremely inventive. Many things discovered in the forces and substances of the universe will be used to provide nourishment for men. But these very discoveries will at the same time make it apparent that matter is connected with the organs of intellect, not with the organs of the spirit. People will learn what to eat and drink in order to become really clever. Eating and drinking cannot make them spiritual, but clever and astute, yes. Men have no knowledge of these things as yet, but not only will they be striven for, they will be the inevitable outcome of catastrophes looming in the near future. And certain secret societies where preparations are already in training will apply these things in such a way that the necessary conditions can be established for an actual incarnation of Ahriman on the earth. This incarnation cannot be averted, for man must realize during the time of the earth's existence just how much can proceed from purely material processes. He must learn to bring under his control those spiritual or unspiritual currents which are leading to Ahriman. In conclusion, Steiner tells us to remember that there is only one book of wisdom, not two kinds of wisdom. The issue is whether this wisdom is in the hands of Ahriman or of Christ. It cannot come into the hands of Christ unless humans fight for it by their own efforts. Humans must assimilate the content of spiritual science before the time of Ahriman's incarnation. In the next video, I'll give a presentation on the 14 lectures called The Fall of the Spirits of Darkness that Steiner gave in Dornach, Switzerland in September and October in 1917, the 4th year into World War I. Thanks for watching. See you next time.